She looked at me across the studio, slow, intense, deliberate. I stood frozen, surrounded by sculptures and soft jazz. She touched another woman, but her eyes never left mine. Then she whispered, "Come here." And I did. Let's uncover what really happened. The invitation wasn't an embossed card, nor a whispered suggestion in a crowded room. It was a look. A long, slow, deliberate appraisal from across the expanse of her art studio. A space usually filled with the scent of turpentine and damp clay, but tonight, it thrummed with a different kind of energy. A low, vibrating hum that had nothing to do with the ambient music drifting from hidden speakers. She, Alara, was leaning against a scarred workbench, a glass of deep red wine in her hand, her dark hair, a chaotic halo around a face that always seemed to hold 1,000 unspoken secrets. Her eyes, the color of burnt honey, found mine where I hovered awkwardly near a collection of half-finished sculptures, their silent, stoic forms somehow mirroring my own internal paralysis. I'd been her assistant for 6 months, a position I'd coveted with an almost religious fervor, not for the meager pay or the chance to learn from a contemporary master, though those were factors, but simply to be in her orbit, to breathe the same air, to occasionally catch the unguarded flicker of her genius, or, more intoxicatingly, the rare, fleeting glimpse of the woman beneath the formidable artist. Tonight was a private viewing, a small, curated gathering of potential patrons and influential critics, a night where Alara was supposed to be the consummate professional, charming and articulate, her brilliance on full display. And she was, for them. But for me, there was something else in her gaze, something that bypassed the polite social niceties, something that spoke directly to the raw, aching fascination I'd tried so desperately to conceal. The invitation in her eyes wasn't for me to join the glittering assembly, to network or impress. It was an invitation to watch, to witness. And the unspoken promise in that look, the dark, thrilling undertone, was that what I was about to see would change everything. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. I knew I should look away, feign interest in the grotesque beauty of a nearby bronze, make myself scarce. But I couldn't. Her gaze held me captive, a silken, invisible tether. Then, she turned, a slow, deliberate movement, her attention shifting to a woman I hadn't particularly noticed before, a woman with fiery red hair and a laugh that was a little too loud, a little too performative. Alara's hand, the one not holding her wine, reached out, her long, artist's fingers lightly tracing the curve of the redhead's arm. A jolt, sharp and unwelcome, shot through me. Jealousy? No, it was more complicated than that. It was a perverse, undeniable curiosity, a horrified fascination. The redhead leaned into Alara's touch, her head tilting back, her laughter softening into something more intimate, more suggestive, and Alara smiled. Not her polite, public smile, but a slow, predatory curve of her lips, a smile that held a dangerous, intoxicating promise. Her eyes, for a fraction of a second, flicked back to me, a silent, knowing acknowledgement, before returning to the woman beside her. The performance, it seemed, was about to begin. And I, her unwilling, yet utterly captivated audience of one, was trapped, a silent spectator in a drama whose script I didn't know, whose ending I couldn't even begin to imagine. The air in the studio grew thick, heavy with unspoken desires, with the intoxicating scent of Alara's perfume. A complex, unsettling blend of vetiver and something vaguely metallic, like ozone before a storm. My own glass of cheap white wine, clutched in my trembling hand, suddenly felt like an anchor, the only thing tethering me to the rapidly tilting floor of my reality. I wanted to run, to escape the suffocating intimacy of what was unfolding, but my feet felt rooted to the spot, my gaze inextricably drawn to the tableau Alara was so masterfully orchestrating. This feeling, this knot of dread and illicit excitement, had been building for months, a slow burn that had started with admiration for her talent and had insidiously morphed into something far more potent, far more dangerous. It was in the way she moved, a languid, almost feline grace that made every gesture, however mundane, seem imbued with a profound sensuality. It was in her voice, that low, husky contralto that could make the most banal observation sound like a whispered secret, a forbidden invitation. It was in her eyes, those pools of burnt honey that seemed to see too much, to know too much, to promise too much. My obsession was a secret I guarded fiercely, a hidden, shameful shrine I visited only in the darkest, most solitary hours of the night. To see it now, reflected back at me in this public, yet intensely private, performance, was both terrifying and perversely, undeniably, thrilling. I was not just her assistant, I was her acolyte, her devotee, a silent, invisible worshipper at the altar of her enigmatic, captivating, and ultimately unknowable self. The studio, usually my sanctuary of focused work and quiet contemplation, had transformed into a stage, and Alara was its undisputed star, her every movement, every glance, every whispered word. A carefully choreographed step in a dance I was only just beginning to understand. The other guests, the patrons, the critics, they were mere set dressing, oblivious to the true drama unfolding in their midst. They saw Alara, the brilliant artist, the charming hostess. They didn't see Alara, the puppet master, pulling the invisible strings of my desire, my fascination, my fear. Only I saw that Alara. Only I was privy to the dark, intoxicating secret that lay beneath the glittering surface. And as she leaned closer to the redhead, her lips brushing against the woman's ear, a silent, knowing smile playing on her own, I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone and thrilled me to the core, that this was only the beginning. The night was a canvas, and Alara was about to paint it in shades of desire and transgression that I had never dared to imagine. And I, her silent, captive audience, could only watch and wait and wonder what masterpiece of torment or ecstasy she would create next. The music, a low, thrumming jazz piece that had been a subtle undercurrent, now seemed to swell, its bluesy saxophone lament mirroring the ache in my own chest. Alara's hand, which had been lightly resting on the redhead's arm, began a slow, deliberate journey upwards, her fingers tracing the delicate line of the woman's collarbone, then moving to her neck, her thumb gently, almost imperceptibly, stroking the sensitive skin just beneath her earlobe. The redhead's eyes fluttered closed, a soft, almost inaudible sigh escaping her lips. Her head tilted, granting Alara further access, a silent, willing surrender. I watched, transfixed, my breath caught in my throat, my own skin prickling with a phantom sensation, as if Alara's fingers were tracing the same path on my own neck. The air in the studio felt thick, heavy, charged with an almost unbearable electricity. The other guests, a few feet away, were still engaged in their polite, animated conversations, their laughter and chatter a jarring counterpoint to the silent, intense drama unfolding before my eyes. They were oblivious, cocooned in their own world of art and commerce and social niceties, unaware of the raw, elemental forces at play in their midst. Only I saw. Only I knew. And Alara, with her unerring, almost cruel, intuition, knew that I knew. Her eyes, those pools of burnt honey, flickered towards me again, just for a fraction of a second, a silent, knowing acknowledgement that I was her intended audience, her captive witness. There was a glint in their depths, a spark of something that looked almost like amusement? Or was it a darker, more complex emotion, a shared complicity in this illicit, intoxicating game? My stomach churned, a nauseous cocktail of jealousy, fascination, and a burgeoning, unwelcome arousal. I wanted to look away, to break the spell, to reclaim some semblance of my own agency. But I couldn't. It was as if Alara had cast an invisible net around me, drawing me closer, deeper, into the vortex of her will. The redhead whispered something in Alara's ear, her voice too low for me to catch the words, but the intent was clear, her body arching subtly towards Alara's, a silent, eloquent expression of desire. Alara's lips curved into that slow, predatory smile again, the one that always made my blood run cold and my pulse quicken in equal measure. She leaned in, her mouth hovering inches from the redhead's, her eyes, however, still fixed on me, a silent, taunting challenge. The tension was almost unbearable. I could feel the heat rising in my own cheeks, a flush of shame, of excitement, of a profound, unsettling confusion. What did she want from me? What was the purpose of this cruel, captivating performance? Was she trying to punish me for my unspoken desires? Or was she, in some twisted, unfathomable way, trying to invite me in? The thought, as terrifying as it was, sent a shiver of illicit pleasure coursing through me. To be invited into Alara's world, not just as her assistant, her acolyte, but as something more. Something darker. Something forbidden. It was a fantasy I had barely dared to acknowledge, even in the most secret recesses of my own mind. And now, it seemed, Alara was bringing that fantasy to life in the most public, yet intensely private, way imaginable. Her lips finally met the redhead's, a slow, deliberate kiss that was both a consummation and a provocation. I watched, my breath catching in my throat, as their mouths moved together, a silent, sensual dance. The redhead's hands came up to tangle in Alara's dark hair, pulling her closer, deepening the kiss. Alara's own hands slid down the redhead's back, her fingers tracing the curve of her spine, before settling on her waist, her grip firm, possessive. The kiss went on, and on, a timeless, breathless eternity. The studio, the other guests, the music, all of it faded into insignificance. There was only this raw, visceral tableau of desire, this silent, eloquent testament to Alara's power, her allure, her ability to command, to captivate, to consume. And I, her silent, captive audience, was utterly, hopelessly, lost in the intoxicating, terrifying beauty of her performance. My own body was a traitor, responding to the scene before me with an unwelcome, undeniable arousal. A slow, molten heat was spreading through my lower belly, my thighs clenching involuntarily, my breath coming in short, shallow gasps. I felt a deep, aching emptiness within me, a yearning so profound, so intense, that it was almost a physical pain. I wanted to be the redhead. I wanted to be the one in Alara's arms, the one whose lips she was devouring, the one whose body she was exploring with such confident, practiced ease. The thought was a betrayal, a violation of every carefully constructed boundary I had erected around my own desires. But it was also, undeniably, terrifyingly, true. The world seemed to tilt on its axis, the familiar lines of my reality blurring, dissolving, reforming into something new, something strange, something dangerous. The studio, usually a place of creative sanctuary, now felt like a stage for a much more personal, much more perilous form of art. Alara, the artist, was using her own body, her own desires, as her medium, and I was her canvas, her unwilling, yet utterly mesmerized, subject. The intensity of the scene before me was a slow burn. Each touch, each glance, each shared breath between Alara and the redhead, a fresh log on the pyre of my own escalating torment and fascination. The kiss, which had begun with a slow, deliberate exploration, now deepened, becoming more urgent, more demanding. Alara's body, usually a study in controlled, languid grace, now moved with a barely suppressed hunger, her hips pressing subtly against the redhead's, a silent, eloquent expression of escalating desire. The redhead, far from being a passive recipient, responded in kind, her own body arching into Alara's embrace, her hands, which had been tangled in Alara's hair, now roaming her back, her fingers kneading the lean muscles beneath the silken fabric of her blouse. They were a vortex of shared passion, a self-contained universe of touch and taste and scent, oblivious, it seemed, to the world around them, to the polite chatter and clinking glasses of the other guests, oblivious perhaps to everyone but me. Because Alara's eyes, those captivating, tormenting pools of burnt honey, still found mine, even in the midst of her passionate embrace. A fleeting glance over the redhead's shoulder, a momentary lifting of her heavy-lidded gaze, a silent, knowing acknowledgement that I was still watching, still her captive audience. And in those brief, electrifying moments of eye contact, I saw not just the heat of her desire for the woman in her arms, but something else, something directed solely at me. A challenge, a taunt, an invitation. My own body was a battleground of conflicting sensations. The slow, molten heat in my lower belly had intensified, coiling into a tight, aching knot of need. My breath was shallow, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I could feel a fine sheen of perspiration on my palms, a betraying dampness between my thighs. I wanted to look away, to break free from the intoxicating, agonizing spell Alara had woven around me. But I couldn't. My gaze was fixed, my will usurped, my entire being consumed by the illicit drama unfolding before me. It was like watching a forbidden film, a secret, private performance intended only for my eyes. A performance designed to awaken, to torment, to ultimately perhaps, to claim. The jealousy I had initially felt, that sharp, unwelcome pang, had morphed into something more complex, more unsettling. It was still there, a dull ache in my chest, but it was now overlaid with a strange, almost perverse, sense of anticipation. What was Alara doing? What did she want from me? And, more importantly, what did I want? The question hung in the air, unspoken but deafening, a terrifying, exhilarating interrogation of my own deepest, most hidden desires. Alara's mouth left the redhead's, trailing a path of fire down her jawline, to the sensitive hollow of her throat. The redhead's head fell back, exposing the elegant line of her neck, a gesture of complete and utter surrender. Alara's lips nuzzled the soft skin, her teeth nipping gently, eliciting a soft, involuntary moan from the redhead, a sound that seemed to vibrate through the very air of the studio, a sound that resonated deep within my own body, awakening dormant, unfamiliar sensations. I saw Alara's hand, the one that had been gripping the redhead's waist, slide lower, her fingers tracing the curve of her hip, before disappearing beneath the hem of her dress. The redhead gasped, her body arching, her fingers clenching in Alara's hair. The implication of that hidden touch, the unseen intimacy, was almost more potent, more arousing, than anything I had witnessed thus far. My own imagination, fueled by months of suppressed longing, filled in the blanks, conjuring images of Alara's skilled artist's fingers, exploring the secret, hidden places of the redhead's body, eliciting sighs and moans of pleasure. And as I watched, as I imagined, my own body responded, a betraying, undeniable ache, of emptiness, of yearning. The music in the studio seemed to shift, the saxophone becoming more plaintive, more mournful, its melody a lament for desires unfulfilled, for boundaries crossed, for the innocence that was rapidly, irrevocably, being lost. Or perhaps it was just my own perception, my own internal state, coloring the sounds around me, transforming the mundane into the meaningful, the ordinary into the extraordinary. Alara lifted her head, her lips still glistening, her eyes dark and luminous, and looked directly at me. The redhead was still in her arms, her eyes closed, her body pliant, lost in a world of sensation. But Alara's gaze was fixed on me, unwavering, intense, a silent, compelling summons. My heart leaped into my throat. This was it. The moment I had both dreaded and craved. The culmination of months of unspoken tension, of stolen glances, of a fascination that had consumed me, body and soul. She knew I was watching. She had known all along. And now, it seemed, she was finally ready to acknowledge it, to draw me into the heart of her dangerous, intoxicating game. The studio, with its oblivious guests and its thrumming, bluesy soundtrack, faded into insignificance. There was only Alara, her eyes holding mine, a silent, irresistible invitation in their depths. And me, her captive audience, her willing, terrified participant, standing on the precipice of a desire so profound, so forbidden, that it threatened to shatter my entire world. The knot in my stomach tightened, a mixture of fear and a wild, reckless, undeniable excitement. The performance was not over. It was just beginning. And I, it seemed, was about to become a part of it. The world seemed to contract, to narrow, until it encompassed only the space between Alara and me. The ambient sounds of the studio, the clinking glasses, the murmur of conversation, the mournful saxophone, faded into a distant, irrelevant hum. Her gaze, that intense, honey-colored fire, was a physical force, pulling me forward, stripping away my defenses, leaving me raw, exposed, and utterly, terrifyingly, vulnerable. My own glass of wine, forgotten in my hand, felt heavy, an anchor to a reality that was rapidly dissolving. I wanted to set it down, to free my hands, but I couldn't seem to break the spell, to sever the invisible tether that connected me to her. Her lips, still moist from her encounter with the redhead, curved into a slow, almost imperceptible smile. It wasn't a smile of warmth or amusement, but something far more complex, something that hinted at a shared secret, a dangerous complicity. The redhead, still nestled in Alara's embrace, her eyes closed, a languid, satisfied expression on her face, seemed almost like a prop now, a beautiful, oblivious instrument in Alara's carefully orchestrated seduction. Or was it a test? Was Alara gauging my reaction, measuring my desire, my fear, my willingness to step across the invisible line she had so masterfully drawn in the sand? My mind raced, a chaotic jumble of conflicting emotions. I should turn away, I told myself. I should walk out of this studio, out of Alara's life, and never look back. This was wrong. This was dangerous. This was a game I didn't understand, a game I couldn't possibly win. But even as the voice of reason screamed its warnings, another, darker, more insistent voice whispered a different message, a seductive, irresistible invitation to surrender, to explore the forbidden, to taste the intoxicating fruit of a desire I had tried so desperately to deny. And that voice, I was beginning to realize, was far more powerful, far more compelling than any rational argument. Alara's head tilted slightly, a subtle, almost feline movement, her eyes never leaving mine. She whispered something to the redhead, her voice too low for me to hear, but the redhead's eyes fluttered open, a dazed, confused expression on her face. She looked from Alara to me, then back to Alara, a slow dawning of understanding, or perhaps just acceptance, in her gaze. She didn't look angry, or jealous, or even particularly surprised. There was a strange, almost passive, quality to her demeanor, as if she too were merely a pawn in Alara's intricate game. With a slow, languid movement, Alara disentangled herself from the redhead's embrace, her hands lingering for a moment on the woman's waist, a gesture that was both a dismissal and a reassurance. The redhead stepped back, creating a space between them, a space that now seemed to be waiting, expectantly, for me to fill. My heart hammered against my ribs so hard I was sure Alara could hear it, even from across the room. My palms were slick with perspiration, my breath shallow, my knees feeling weak, unsteady. This was it. The moment of decision. The point of no return. Alara's gaze intensified, a silent, compelling summons. There was no escape, no hiding, no pretending. She saw me. She knew me. She knew the secret, shameful desires that I had tried so desperately to conceal, even from myself. And she wasn't repulsed. She wasn't judgmental. She was inviting. Slowly, as if moving through water, I began to walk towards her, Each step felt like a monumental effort, a surrender of will, a capitulation to a force far greater than myself. The few feet that separated us seemed to stretch into an eternity, each second laden with an almost unbearable weight of anticipation, of fear, of a wild, reckless, undeniable hope. As I drew closer, I could see the subtle details of her face, the faint flush on her cheeks, the slight tremor in her lips, the almost imperceptible dilation of her pupils. She was not as calm, as composed, as she appeared. She too was affected by the charged, an energy that crackled between us, by the dangerous, intoxicating game we were playing. I stopped a few feet away from her, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from her body, close enough to breathe in her scent, that intoxicating blend of vetiver and ozone, and something uniquely, undeniably. Alara, the redhead, I noticed peripherally, had faded into the background, a silent, observant shadow. Her role in this drama, for the moment at least, seemingly concluded. There was only Alara, and me, and the silent throbbing space between us, a space that was both a chasm and a bridge, a battlefield and a sanctuary. "Alex," she said, her voice a low, husky whisper, my name on her lips. A caress, an incantation, a promise. It was not a question. It was a statement, an acknowledgement, a claim. And in that moment, as her eyes, those pools of burnt honey, held mine captive, I knew, with a certainty that was both terrifying and exhilarating, that I was lost. Utterly, hopelessly, beautifully lost. The carefully constructed walls I had built around my heart, around my desires, crumbled into dust, leaving me exposed, vulnerable, and trembling on the precipice of a desire so profound, so forbidden, that it threatened to consume me completely. And the most terrifying, most beautiful, most undeniable truth of all? I wanted to be consumed. I wanted to surrender. I wanted Alara. More than I had ever wanted anything or anyone in my life. The journey across the studio floor, those few, seemingly interminable steps that separated me from Alara, felt like a crossing of the Rubicon, a deliberate, irrevocable step into a new, uncharted territory of desire and consequence. With each footfall, the ambient noise of the party seemed to recede further, the polite chatter and clinking glasses dissolving into a distant, irrelevant murmur. The world had contracted, its focus narrowing to the woman who stood before me, her presence a magnetic force, her gaze a captivating inferno. As I finally came to a halt, a mere arm's length away, the air between us crackled with an almost visible energy. I could feel the heat emanating from her body, a subtle, intoxicating warmth that seemed to draw me closer, despite the warning bells clanging in the recesses of my mind. Her scent, that unique, unsettling blend of vetiver and something wild, almost feral, enveloped me, clouding my senses, dulling the sharp edges of my fear. The redhead, I was vaguely aware, had retreated to a shadowy corner, her role in this particular act seemingly complete, though her gaze, I sensed, was still upon us, a silent, watchful presence. But she was a peripheral detail now, a minor character in a drama that was rapidly escalating towards its central, inevitable conflict, or perhaps its consummation. Alara's eyes, those mesmerizing pools of burnt honey, held mine captive. There was no pretense left, no social niceties, no carefully constructed masks. Just a raw, unadulterated acknowledgement of the dangerous, intoxicating current that flowed between us. Her lips, still faintly swollen from her encounter with the redhead, curved into a slow, almost imperceptible smile, a smile that was both a welcome and a warning. "You came," she said, her voice a low, husky whisper, a silken thread in the charged silence. It wasn't a question, but a statement of fact, an acknowledgement of my surrender, of my inability to resist her silent, compelling summons. I began, my own voice a shaky, unreliable stranger. What could I say? That I had no choice? That her will was a force I couldn't, or perhaps wouldn't, fight against? That the desire she had so masterfully ignited within me had burned away all reason, all restraint? She didn't wait for me to finish. Her hand, those long, elegant artist's fingers that could coax such beauty from clay and canvas, lifted, slowly, deliberately, and reached towards my face. My breath hitched. My heart hammered against my ribs, a wild, frantic drumbeat against the backdrop of the thrumming jazz. Her fingertips, cool and surprisingly firm, traced the line of my jaw, a feather-light caress that sent an explosion of sensation through my entire body. I closed my eyes, a soft, involuntary sigh escaping my lips. It was an almost unbearable intimacy, this simple, tender gesture, yet it felt more profound, more arousing, than any overt sexual advance could have been. Her thumb gently stroked my cheek, a slow, hypnotic rhythm that seemed to soothe the frantic fluttering in my chest, even as it ignited a deeper, more insistent fire in my core. "Open your eyes, Alex," she murmured, her voice a seductive command, her breath warm and sweet against my skin. I obeyed, my eyelids fluttering open, my gaze locking with hers. The intensity I saw there, the raw, untamed hunger, stole the air from my lungs. This was Alara stripped bare, her desires, her intentions, laid out before me, an irresistible, terrifying invitation. "I knew you would," she continued, her voice dropping even lower, a conspiratorial whisper that was meant only for me. "I knew you were watching. I knew you wanted to." Her words were a confirmation, a validation of the secret, shameful desires I had harbored for so long. There was no judgment in her tone, no condemnation, only a calm, almost clinical, acknowledgement of a shared, forbidden truth. And in that acknowledgement, there was a strange, perverse kind of liberation. "What? What do you want, Alara?" I managed to whisper, the question a raw, desperate plea, for clarity, for understanding, in a situation that was rapidly spiraling beyond my comprehension, beyond my control. A slow, predatory smile touched her lips. "Isn't it obvious, Alex?" she purred, her eyes glittering with a dangerous, intoxicating light. "I want you." The words, so direct, so unapologetic, hit me with the force of a physical blow. "I want you." It was everything I had secretly, shamefully, desperately wanted to hear, and yet, hearing them spoken aloud, in her low, husky voice, was both terrifying and exhilarating. My mind reeled. My body trembled. This couldn't be happening. This was a dream, a fantasy, a dangerous, intoxicating illusion. But the feel of her fingers on my skin, the heat of her body so close to mine, the scent of her filling my senses, it was all undeniably, terrifyingly real. Before I could respond, before I could even process the enormity of her declaration, she moved. Her other hand came up to cup my face, her thumbs gently stroking my cheekbones, her gaze holding mine captive. She leaned in, slowly, deliberately, and her lips, cool and soft, brushed against mine. It was a ghost of a kiss, a feather-light promise, yet it sent an explosion of sensation through my entire body, a jolt of pure, unadulterated electricity that left me breathless, trembling, clinging to her as if she were the only solid thing in a universe that was rapidly, irrevocably, dissolving around me. The world outside, the studio, the other guests, the redhead in the shadows, all of it faded into an irrelevant, distant haze. There was only Alara, her eyes, her touch, her scent, her lips, a universe of sensation and desire that was rapidly, completely, consuming me. And as her mouth finally claimed mine, in a kiss that was both a surrender and a conquest, a beginning and an end, I knew, with a certainty that was as terrifying as it was exhilarating, that my life, as I had known it, was over. And a new one. A dangerous, intoxicating, Alara-centric one. was just beginning. The brush of Alera's lips against mine was a spark, igniting a conflagration that had been smoldering within me for months. The initial contact was feather light, a teasing promise, but it held the weight of unspoken desires, of shared secrets, of a dangerous, intoxicating power dynamic that was now undeniably, irrevocably, in play. My mind, which had been a chaotic jumble of fear and confusion, went blissfully, terrifyingly, blank. All thought, all reason, all semblance of self-preservation dissolved in the face of her overwhelming proximity, her undeniable, irresistible allure. There was only sensation, raw and unfiltered. The coolness of her fingertips on my skin. A stark contrast to the heat that was rapidly building within me. The subtle, intoxicating scent of her perfume now mingled with the fainter, muskier aroma of her recent encounter with the redhead, a scent that should have been a warning, a deterrent, but instead, perversely, only served to heighten my own escalating arousal. Her breath, warm and sweet, mingling with mine, a shared, intimate exhalation in the charged air, and then her lips. They were softer than I had imagined, yet firm, confident, knowing. The initial, tentative touch deepened, almost imperceptibly at first, then with a growing, undeniable insistence. It was a kiss of exploration, a silent, sensual conversation, a mutual discovery of taste, of texture, of shared, forbidden hunger. My own lips parted, an unconscious invitation, a surrender to the inevitable. Her tongue, a silken, knowing intruder, met mine, a slow, deliberate dance that sent shivers of pleasure, of an almost unbearable sensitivity, coursing through my entire being. I could feel the slight tremor in her hands as they cupped my face, a betraying sign that she, too, was affected by the intensity of the moment, that this was not just a calculated seduction, but something more, something deeper, something that perhaps even she hadn't anticipated. Or was that just wishful thinking? My desperate heart clinging to the illusion of a shared vulnerability, of a mutual surrender? A soft sound, a sigh, a moan, escaped my lips, muffled against hers. My hands, which had been hanging limply at my sides, came up, tentatively at first, then with a growing, desperate urgency, to rest on her waist. I could feel the lean, strong muscles beneath the silken fabric of her blouse, the subtle, almost imperceptible, tremor that ran through her body. I pulled her closer, needing to feel the length of her against me, needing to bridge the small, agonizing gap that still separated us. She responded, her body molding against mine, a perfect, intoxicating fit. The world outside, the studio, the other guests, the redhead watching from the shadows, all of it ceased to exist. We were cocooned in our own private universe, a universe created by touch, by taste, by scent, a universe where the only reality was the fierce, undeniable truth of our shared desire. The kiss deepened further, becoming more urgent, more demanding, a raw, hungry exploration of mouths and senses. There was no tenderness in it now, no gentle exploration, only a fierce, consuming need, a desperate, urgent hunger that had been suppressed for too long, that was now, finally, irrevocably, unleashed. I could taste the wine on her breath, a dark, fruity counterpoint to the muskier, more primal taste of her skin, of her desire. It was an intoxicating cocktail, a forbidden elixir, that I drank down greedily, desperately, knowing that it would lead to my undoing, yet unable, unwilling, to resist. Her hands slid from my face, down my neck, her fingers tracing the line of my collarbone, sending fresh waves of sensation, of an almost painful pleasure, through me. One hand found its way to the small of my back, pressing me even closer, her hips moving in a slow, sinuous rhythm against mine. A silent, eloquent expression of escalating arousal. The other hand moved to my hair, her fingers tangling in the strands, tilting my head back, granting her deeper access, a more complete possession. I was lost, adrift in a sea of sensation, my body a pliant, willing instrument in her skilled artist's hands. She was an explorer, a cartographer of my desires, charting the unknown territories of my own sensuality with a confident, unerring touch. And I, her willing, eager subject, surrendered to her exploration, to her possession, with a completeness that was both terrifying and exhilarating. The music in the studio, that low, thrumming jazz, seemed to swell, its bluesy saxophone lament a perfect, mournful counterpoint to the raw, untamed passion that consumed us. The flickering candlelight from distant tables cast dancing shadows on the walls, transforming our embrace into a primal, elemental tableau, a scene from a dream or a nightmare, depending on one's perspective. For me, in that moment, it was a dream, a dark, intoxicating, beautiful dream, a dream I never wanted to wake from. The fear, the guilt, the shame, all of it was still there, lurking in the shadows of my consciousness, but it was muted, distant, overshadowed by the overwhelming, incandescent reality of Alara's embrace. This was wrong. I knew it was wrong, but it also felt inevitable, fated. As if all the moments of my life, all the choices, all the chances, had been leading me, inexorably, to this moment, to this woman, to this forbidden, beautiful, terrifying kiss. And as her mouth left mine, trailing a path of fire down my jawline, to the sensitive hollow of my throat, her lips nuzzling the soft skin, her teeth nipping gently, eliciting a fresh wave of shivers, of an almost painful pleasure, I knew, with a certainty that was as profound as it was unsettling, that I was hers, utterly, completely, irrevocably hers. And the thought, as terrifying as it was, filled me with a strange, exhilarating sense of peace, of surrender, of coming home. The journey from that first, searing kiss to the shadowed alcove at the far end of the studio was a blur of heightened senses and fragmented impressions. Alara's hand, firm and possessive on the small of my back, guided me, her body a warm, insistent presence beside mine. The faces of the other guests were indistinct smudges in my peripheral vision, their polite chatter a distant, irrelevant hum. My entire being was focused on her, on the intoxicating reality of her touch, her scent, the lingering taste of her on my lips. The alcove was dimly lit, offering a semblance of privacy, a temporary sanctuary from the prying eyes of the main studio. It was filled with Alara's discarded sketches, with half-formed clay figures draped in damp cloths, with the familiar, comforting scent of turpentine and earth. It was her space, her inner sanctum, and her bringing me here felt like a profound, almost sacred invitation. She didn't release me immediately. Instead, she backed me against a cool, plaster wall, her body pressing against mine, trapping me between her heat and the unyielding surface behind me. Her eyes, those mesmerizing pools of burnt honey, searched mine, dark and luminous in the dim light. Filled with an emotion I couldn't quite decipher, desire, certainly, but also something else. Something that looked almost like vulnerability? Or was it a predatory gleam, a hunter's satisfaction at having finally cornered her prey? "Alex," she whispered, her voice a low, husky caress against my ear, her warm breath fanning across my skin, sending fresh shivers of anticipation down my spine. "Do you have any idea how long I've wanted to do that?" Her words, a raw, honest admission, shattered the last vestiges of my resistance. To know that this wasn't just a game, a whim, a calculated seduction, but a desire that mirrored my own, a longing that had, perhaps, been building within her for just as long. It was an intoxicating, overwhelming revelation. I began, my own voice shaky, unsteady. I think I've wanted it too." A slow, knowing smile touched her lips. "I know," she murmured, her mouth finding the sensitive skin just beneath my earlobe, her teeth nipping gently, eliciting a soft, involuntary gasp from my lips. Her hands, which had been resting on my waist, began to move, slowly, deliberately, exploring the contours of my body, learning its lines, its curves, its hidden sensitivities. One hand slid up my side, her fingers tracing the line of my ribs before moving to cup my breast, her thumb brushing against my nipple through the thin fabric of my dress, sending a jolt of pure, unadulterated electricity through my entire body. I arched into her touch, a silent plea for more, my hands clutching at her shoulders for support as my knees threatened to buckle. The other hand moved lower, her fingers tracing the waistband of my dress, then slipping beneath the fabric, her touch on my bare skin a searing brand. She didn't rush. Her exploration was slow, deliberate, almost agonizingly so. Each touch, each caress, designed to heighten the anticipation, to push me closer and closer to the brink of an almost unbearable pleasure. I could feel the heat building within me, a molten core of desire that threatened to consume me completely. My breath came in short, sharp gasps, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The air in the alcove was thick, heavy, charged with an almost unbearable tension, with the intoxicating scent of our shared arousal. Her mouth left my neck, trailing a path of fire down my collarbone, then lower, to the swell of my breasts. Her lips closed over one hardened nipple, her tongue teasing, tormenting, through the thin fabric of my dress, and I cried out, a raw, keening sound that was swallowed by the dim, shadowed space. This was a new territory for me, this raw, untamed expression of desire, this surrender to a passion that was as terrifying as it was exhilarating. I had always been the good girl, the sensible one, the one who followed the rules, who stayed within the lines. But with Alara, all the rules, all the lines, seemed to dissolve, to become irrelevant. With Alara, there was only this fierce, consuming, undeniable connection, this dangerous, intoxicating dance of desire and surrender. Her hand, the one that had been exploring my lower back, slid around to my stomach, her fingers spreading out, her palm pressing against my skin, a searing brand. And then, slowly, deliberately, her fingers began to move lower, tracing a path towards the apex of my thighs, towards the hidden, secret core of my pleasure. My breath hitched. My body tensed, a mixture of fear and a desperate, overwhelming anticipation. This was it, the point of no return. The final, irrevocable surrender. And as her fingers finally found their mark, as a jolt of pure, unadulterated pleasure shot through me, so intense it almost buckled my knees, I knew, with a certainty that was both terrifying and exhilarating, that I was lost. Utterly, hopelessly, beautifully, lost. In her. In this moment. In this forbidden, intoxicating, all-consuming desire, the world outside, the studio, the other guests, the life I had known before Alara, all of it ceased to exist. There was only this shadowed alcove, this woman, her touch, her scent, her power, and the shattering, transcendent pleasure that was rapidly, completely, consuming me. The alcove became our secret world, a shadowy confessional where unspoken desires were given voice through touch and taste and scent. Alara's fingers, those skilled, artist's fingers, were a revelation against my skin, tracing paths of fire, awakening nerve endings I hadn't known existed. The thin fabric of my dress, which had seemed like a shield just moments before, now felt like an unbearable constraint, a flimsy barrier between my desperate need and her knowing touch. Her hand, which had found the apex of my thighs, didn't rush. Her exploration was slow, deliberate, almost agonizingly so. Each touch, each caress, designed to heighten the anticipation, to draw out the pleasure, to push me closer and closer to the brink of an almost unbearable sensitivity. I could feel the dampness gathering between my legs, a betraying, undeniable testament to the power she held over me. A soft moan escaped my lips, a sound of pure, unadulterated surrender, and her name, a ragged, broken whisper. Alara. Her lips, which had been nuzzling the swell of my breasts, found mine again, a deep, possessive kiss that tasted of wine and desire and the intoxicating, musky scent of her arousal. Her tongue met mine, a silken, knowing invader, exploring, claiming, possessing. It was a kiss that stripped away the last vestiges of my resistance, leaving me raw, exposed, and utterly, terrifyingly, vulnerable. My own hands, which had been clutching at her shoulders, began their own exploration, driven by a desperate, urgent need to reciprocate, to learn the landscape of her body as she was learning mine. I fumbled with the buttons of her blouse, my fingers clumsy, uncoordinated, but she helped me, her own hands covering mine, guiding them until the last button was undone, and the soft, silken fabric parted, revealing the delicate lace of her bra, the swell of her breasts, the smooth, pale skin of her stomach. Her skin was even softer than I had imagined, warm and yielding beneath my touch. I traced the line of her collarbone, the curve of her shoulder, marveling at the exquisite beauty of her, a beauty that was both elegant and fiercely, unapologetically sensual. She unhooked her bra with a practiced ease that sent a fresh jolt of arousal through me, letting it fall to the floor, a forgotten casualty of our escalating passion. And then we were skin to skin, the soft pressure of her breasts against mine, the warmth of her stomach against my own, the feeling of her heart beating in frantic unison with mine. It was a symphony of sensation, a confirmation of a connection that was as profound as it was forbidden. Her hand, the one that had been exploring my lower body, now slipped beneath the elastic of my underwear, her fingers finding the slick, swollen folds of my sex. I cried out, a raw, involuntary sound, my body arching against hers, my hips moving in a desperate, instinctive rhythm. Her touch was knowing, confident, her fingers moving with a skill, a precision, that ignited fires I hadn't known existed. She knew what I wanted, what I needed, perhaps even before I did. And she gave it to me, generously, unreservedly, her touch both tender and demanding, coaxing from me a response that was both a surrender and a fierce, untamed assertion of my own burgeoning desire. The world narrowed to this single, incandescent point of contact, to the feel of her fingers, the heat of her mouth, the intoxicating scent of her arousal. Nothing else mattered. There was only this fierce, desperate, beautiful act of mutual discovery, of shared surrender. I was lost in a maelstrom of sensation, my body arching and writhing beneath her touch, my breath coming in ragged gasps, my mind a blissful, empty void. The sounds that escaped my lips were raw, uninhibited, a testament to the overwhelming power of the pleasure she was eliciting from me. And then I felt it. The first, subtle tremor, the telltale clenching of my inner muscles, the sharp, indrawn breath that signaled my approaching release. It was like a signal to her, a cue to intensify her ministrations, to push me over the edge. With a final, desperate surge of movement from her skilled fingers, a guttural cry torn from my own throat, the world exploded in a blinding flash of white-hot pleasure, a shattering, transcendent release that left me gasping, trembling, clinging to her as if she were the only solid thing in a universe that had just been ripped apart and reassembled. The aftershocks rippled through me for long, shuddering moments, my body still intimately entwined with hers, slick with sweat, my breath coming in ragged, uneven gasps. A profound, bone-deep weariness settled over me, a languid, delicious exhaustion that left my limbs feeling heavy, my mind blissfully empty. I collapsed against Alara, my head resting in the damp hollow of her shoulder, her arms coming around me, holding me close, her heart beat a slow, steady rhythm beneath my ear, a comforting counterpoint to the fading thunder of my own. We stood like that for a long time, wrapped in a cocoon of shared intimacy, the silence in the alcove broken only by the soft sound of our breathing and the distant, muffled thrum of the party outside. A world away. There were no words. None were needed. Everything that had needed to be said had been spoken in the silent, eloquent language of our bodies, in the raw, uninhibited expression of our shared forbidden desire. As the last vestiges of the orgasm receded, and the first, faint hints of a dawning awareness began to seep through the intoxicating haze of passion, a new, more unsettling reality began to assert itself. The dim light of the alcove, which had seemed so intimate, so protective, just moments before, now felt revealing, exposing. The scent of sex, sharp and musky, hung heavy in the air, a tangible reminder of our transgression. A cold knot of anxiety began to form in my stomach, a stark contrast to the lingering warmth that still suffused my body. This was Alara, my mentor, my employer, a woman whose talent I revered, whose approval I craved, and I had just acts with her. In her studio, during her private viewing. The potential for disaster, for scandal, for a ruinous, irreparable damage to both our lives, was immense, terrifying. What now? The question hung in the air, unspoken but palpable, a heavy, ominous cloud that threatened to eclipse the fragile beauty of what we had just shared. I could feel Alara stir beside me, her body tensing slightly, as if she, too, were grappling with the dawning implications of our actions. The shared intimacy, so raw and uninhibited just moments before, was now tinged with a new, uncertain awkwardness. This was uncharted territory for both of us, a dangerous, intoxicating landscape with no maps, no signposts, only the lingering, undeniable memory of our shared, forbidden pleasure. And the terrifying, exhilarating question of what would happen next.